This is from the start of the book, when Scummo has decided that he's going to leave the city apartment where they've been living and take the little girl, his neighbour's little daughter, with him. So in order to get out without being seen, they go down a manhole. Climb! I'll be right behind you. Good girl. She swarmed up like a monkey and he had a job to keep up with her. At the top she had jumped out, was looking at his face with amused eyes as it emerged. "You're all sooty," she said. "What a mucky face." Before he could stop her, she spat on a corner of her pullover and wiped his face. He was suddenly touched and put his arm round her in a quick hug. They were very hungry by now, but all he had left was a little dried milk. He gave it to her and she licked it off the paper wrapper thoughtfully. "We need a drink," he observed. Moving slowly and quietly along the ruined streets of the old town, they came across a standpipe and some containers. Drinking water for the dogs, he thought. He turned the tap on and a slow trickle of water slid into his cupped hands. He cleaned them and drank, letting Kelpin do the same. He tied her clothes together as well as he could and fastened them around his waist. At the end of the road they came across something they'd not been expecting. A footpath leading through the wall into the countryside beyond. A camera was mounted on the wall to observe all who passed. So they go through and leave the city behind. And the masters, the high masters of the city, who were playing chess in their watchtower, watched them go with slight interest. Another battery chicken falling off the back of the lorry on the way to the chicken factory, they thought. As far as they were concerned, Scummo had saved them the trouble of fetching the little girl and placing her in a compound. They only died there anyway, deprived of their mothers. They would of course die here too, deprived of food and shelter. It would take slightly longer perhaps, but die they would, and the dogs would have their bodies. So, he shouldn't have slept. He gazed anxiously at the small dark shape, still sleeping on the bench. Kelpin's hands opened and shut. She muttered something in her sleep. Scummo rose stiffly and stretched, yawning. He drank long and deeply. His clothes smelt damp and unpleasant, but the sun was nearly up and he was cheered by the growing warmth and light. He scanned the horizon, looking for he knew not what. Nothing behind him was the shadowy apparition of the city they had left, rising up out of the fields like some ghostly submarine. The trees were old, but he didn't remember what species they were. They had yellow baubles on them. He thought they might be flowers, but there was nothing edible anyway. But back in the apartments, where they've just left, it was 7-day afternoon in the apartments of Broiler House 8, and the apartment dwellers were out on their balconies, waiting for contests to start. Andalou, a rangy, stringy-muscled neighbour, was leaning over the balcony outside the apartment that had belonged to Scummo. Another woman had been moved into Minna's apartment. Andalou was interested in her, but so far she hadn't responded. He hugged a mug of Gavo brew, that's what they'd been given to drink. He thought of Scummo. What had happened to him? Andalou missed him. There were few friendships in the apartments. They go back to the city at the end of the book, but nothing about the city was as Scummo remembered it. Yet it was still the same in essence. Gone were the hover platforms, gone the running feet of workers up and down the stairways. It was quiet everywhere. They kept their distance from the empty buildings, not knowing who might be there. Some sort of enforced quarantine had been organised, it seemed, as the apartments they peeped into showed evidence of a hasty move. There were no bodies. Scummo looked around the building he had lived in. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The dull green stain on the balcony wall, where his neighbour had spat continually, was still there. The grey, dirty, ugly buildings were all still the same. Had the masters really abandoned the city? Where were the bodies? And if there were any survivors, where were they? Bethel went in front of Scomo, silently listening, looking, checking. They covered 2 blocks in this way, then passed the next 2, feeling there was little point in searching each one when there were no sounds or signs of anyone. The last block was slightly detached from the others. So they've had a virus infection, what's new, back in the city. Getting back to the city had been harder than they imagined. The fields were ragged and overgrown. The field workers who formed a large number of the city dwellers had been among the first to fall ill. Without them, the land soon returned to its natural state, once the masters had left.